All right, everybody. Welcome to Irish Breakdown After Dark. It is Tuesday night, and we just had a college football playoff ranking come out. And since it's Tuesday, Brian and I are going to discuss that ranking, and we are going to talk about everything that has to do with that ranking, and especially how it applies to Notre Dame. And it's going to be fun because I will say, though, this is the first time that we've had the rankings that I've been right about how I thought that they should. Let me rephrase that. That I think the committee got it right because it's what I thought it was going to be. So I will say that I was very happy. I'll give you my overall. I was very happy Ohio State jumped Alabama. I think that's telling to what happens if Alabama loses close and all that. Nonsense, right?
And we'll definitely get into that for sure after we talk about where Notre Dame was. Notre Dame is 6th in the latest rankings, which is expected. Last week, I think there was some talk that maybe Oklahoma State would jump them. They did not. We'll get into the Big 12 next. But Notre Dame jumps up to 6, and Ohio State Michigan is obviously number 5, as they expected to be based on where they were last week. And Michigan had a convincing victory this weekend as well, right? Sure. Michigan beat did they play this weekend? It wasn't Indiana. They crushed Maryland. Was it Maryland? And they crushed them. Yeah, they crushed them. So Michigan stays ahead of them, which, I'm fine with. It really does. I mean, to your point, it really doesn't matter. This is kind of what you had said a week or so ago. It really doesn't matter. I think Michigan and Michigan State, I could argue that Notre Dame should have been ahead of Michigan based on a couple factors, but it's kind of like it's close enough to where it doesn't matter. It's not like Michigan's going to lose and then stay ahead of Notre Dame. It's not that kind of deal.
If Michigan had like IU and like somebody else, left on their schedule and it looked like they were going to run the table,
then we could be like,
then we have that conversation. Sure. Absolutely. Sure. But they got to play Ohio State this week.
Right. They played at Maryland and won 59-18. Maryland's a better team than Georgia Tech. That's a pretty convincing win. So when you look at it, I think Notre Dame is positioned where I thought they would be. I think they're positioned still well. There's a lot of football to be played. There's still 2 games of teams ranked ahead of Notre Dame left on the schedule.
Correct.
You have Ohio State and Michigan this week. You have Bama and Georgia next week. We'll get into how big that was. But, Vince, I think a couple things about the rankings that, to me, I think hurt Notre Dame a little bit. Number one was Purdue not jumping back in. That can still happen because they play home against Indiana this weekend. I think 8-4. I didn't necessarily think that if Purdue won this past weekend, they would jump in. But I think if they win both, they're going to jump in. Of course, there's still some games to be played. So I think that isn't great for Notre Dame, in my opinion, but there's still a chance for that. I think, and obviously Wisconsin is moved up to, let me pull up my ranking here real quick. I think Wisconsin jumped. They're up to 14. Okay. Yeah. So they're up to 14. So that's good. So, I mean, as long as they don't lose to Minnesota this weekend, Notre Dame's going to have a top 15 victory.
Sure.
Because even if they lose to Ohio State after beating Minnesota, the odds are they stay right around that 15 mark. So now for Notre Dame, it's just about, okay, are they going to be able to get Purdue back in there?
And I think they would. I think they'd be in like the 23 area, if they beat IU. I think that's fair to say.
Which they should. Yeah. They should beat IU.
Yes.
And then you look at the teams ahead of them, obviously. There were some interesting rankings here. So let's dive into we'll dive into all the different topics and how it relates to Notre Dame. Number one, I was actually thinking the committee might jump Michigan over Cincinnati, and I'm glad they did not.
I'm glad they didn't too, because I think that would have been ridiculous.
Mike, I agree, but the fact that they don't respect the AAC, it was kind of like they've done everything that they could do up to this point to just crush Cincinnati. You know what I mean?
Sure.
But the way that Cincinnati played last weekend, smashing an 8-2 SMU team, again, not a top 25 SMU team, but it's still an 8-2 SMU team.
Sure.
smashing them the way that and beating them the way that they did. What was it, like 48-14, something like that? Like, it was a convincing victory. And then Houston now had a win over Memphis last week, so Houston stays in. I was a little surprised Houston didn't move up. That's the thing that kind of bothered me is, Houston didn't move up at all. But they're still at 24. Houston has a game this weekend that they should win. So as long as Houston handles business this weekend, I imagine it's gonna set up nicely for Cincinnati. But at this point in time, with Cincinnati being in and the team directly behind them having to play a team 2 spots ahead of them, I think that gives them a little breathing room to where if they win out, it really won't matter what happens anywhere else. And you had one of those knuckleheads at ESPN, David Pollack, who we'll get into, talking about, like, he's advocating, like, well, if Oklahoma State wins out, shouldn't they jump Cincinnati? Find someone new to give analysis on ESPN, please, for the love of God. Find people that know what they're talking about. If Cincinnati goes undefeated with a win over what's going to be a top 5 Notre Dame team on the road by 11. Now, everyone knows my opinion on how Notre Dame played that day, right? Notre Dame did not play well. If they played again, I think they would win, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that doesn't matter because on that day, Cincinnati beat them by 11.
Yeah.
And was up 17-0 at halftime. It's not like, Notre Dame clawed back in late and Cincinnati went down and did what they had to do and won the game. They've beaten everybody in front of them. They scheduled a Big Ten team. Beat them by 14, right? And they've won all their games. I mean, I don't know what else you can ask them to do at this point in time. Now, if Cincinnati loses, they're out.
They're out.
They're out.
They may be out of the top 10. I mean, I'm serious. And they would drop them.
They won't. Here's why they won't drop them out of top 10. Here's why they won't. Because Cincinnati will get a group of so the group of 5 best team gets a major bowl.
Right.
They're going to want Cincinnati ranked as high as possible for that matchup to give it some pizzazz,
to give it some juice.
Right.
Yeah,
they won't drop them too far as long as they only lose once. So, but Cincinnati's sitting there. So to me, there's now 4 teams that control their own. Well, 5 teams that control their own destiny, in my opinion. Georgia and Alabama in the SEC. Both control their own destiny, meaning if they win out, they're in. Now, both of them can't win out.
Correct.
But either one of them wins out, they're in. Ohio State and Michigan, both. If they win out, if Ohio State wins out, they're in. If Michigan wins out, they're in.
Agreed.
Meaning, and then the loser of that game is out. And then Cincinnati now is finally in control of their own destiny. I believe they are.
I believe they are too.
Yeah. Because of what happened with Oregon and because the ACC and the Pac-12 are now out. There's now 2 Power 5s that are out. That's huge for Cincinnati. And the other thing too is the fact that the one non-Power 5, conference, Notre Dame, they beat head to head. And then the Big 12 is just a conference that clearly the committee doesn't think all that highly of.
True.
And we'll get into that because there's some thoughts on that, but it actually, we'll get into that. But anyway, so I think Cincinnati controls their own destiny. And so those are the 5. Notre Dame does not control their own destiny. They don't.
No, they don't.
There are things that could happen. They need help, right?
Yes.
They can win this weekend and it won't mean a darn thing.
Correct.
They're at best to me can be 5 now. Or I mean, at worst to me are going to be 5.
At worst, they'll be 5. I agree
They're going to still need help to get up into 4. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that, Vince. So Cincinnati to me is, and we actually had a super chat from Hunter. Remember when Hunter came into the show a few weeks ago? So Hunter's back. Appreciate that, Hunter. Friendly neighborhood Cincy fan back again. Super happy for us, but also super happy for y'all. Still a good chance we both make it. Much respect, y'all. I mean, I think there still is a chance. Obviously, it's a greater chance for Cincinnati right now, but they've got to win out. And I'm curious to see how they play against ECU this weekend.
Sure.
Because here's what I mean by that.
Target on their back. Not that they haven't had the target on their back, but I think it got bigger. I do. I think it got bigger now that they're in the Final Four, the top 4.
Yeah, I don't think it does. I get where you're coming from. I don't think that means a whole lot because there's still teams in the AAC are battling for them, and to me, I think the target on their back got huge when they beat Notre Dame. The target couldn't have got any bigger then because it's like, you look at the rest of their schedule, there's nobody on that schedule that could beat them. So Cincinnati handled their business. Ohio State flipping Alabama is huge for Notre Dame.
Yes.
And because now you're in a situation, if Georgia beats Alabama, I think Bama's out. I don't think Bama can stay in with 2 losses now that they're down to 3. Now, because I was going to say, Vince, is if they kept them at 2, there's no way they drop them 3 spots unless Alabama unless Georgia straight destroys.
I agree.
And I don't think that's going to happen.
That's why that was so big, because look, if you're just doing the eyeball test and you're not thinking ahead to the SEC championship and all that, Ohio State should be ranked higher than Alabama. Okay. But if you listen to Barta talk about why they did that, they're like, oh man, Alabama's still a great team and they got that great win over Ole Miss and blah, blah, blah. Like, really? That's a great win over Ole. I mean, it's a solid win because now Ole Miss is a top 10 team.
That's a pretty good win in my opinion.
Okay, but
yeah,
Ole Miss is a good football team.
Alabama. Yeah, but he did say they haven't been playing. They have been playing great in recent weeks.
Absolutely,
and he did say they haven't been as dominant in recent weeks.
And
Alabama still is a great team, but he was absolutely right. So and Ohio State they're playing too well not to jump up.
I mean, it's just
they're playing. I mean, and he made a point that Ohio State's defense has gotten better, which it has. We've talked about that on this show. So I thought that was big for Notre Dame. Now here's the thing that I've heard a lot of people. I saw some people in the chat, Vince, that were talking about they've positioned the Big 12 to jump Notre Dame. I don't see it that way. That doesn't mean it won't happen, right? And we'll get into that. But all that they did with the Big 12 was move Oklahoma State, Baylor, Ole Miss.
Looks like we lost Brian. And he's let me get rid of this super chat right here. And we also had another super chat.
Bob Bowlesby's jacking with my feed right now. What I was saying about What I was saying about the Big 12 is, so what the committee did was last week you had Oklahoma State was 8, right?
Yeah, they're right behind Notre Dame.
And then Baylor, I'm trying to pull up last week.
No, Oklahoma State was 9 because Notre Dame
Notre Dame was 8. Yes, they were one spot behind Notre Dame.
Right.
And then you had Baylor was last week, I believe, was 11.
And Oklahoma was 13. I do remember.
Last week. Let me pull up last week's rankings. Because what they did was they moved those 3 teams up above 3 teams that lost, essentially. So last week, Oklahoma State was 9, Wake Forest was 10, Baylor was 11, Ole Miss was 12, Oklahoma was 13. Okay, so
everybody's like kind of
because right. So like they were like, oh, Oklahoma's been all over the place. No, Oklahoma dropped and they lost and they moved up because what happened was you had number 3 Oregon lost and fell behind all those teams. Number 7 Michigan State lost and fell behind all those teams. And then Wake Forest lost and fell behind all those teams. So all that they did was just bump them all up above the teams that lost. There was no like maneuvering those teams around, in my opinion. There's nothing on there that says, hey, they maneuvered them. It's like this is where they were last week and teams lost, right? 3 teams lost. So they still kept Baylor. Again, Baylor moved up 3 spots to number 8. It should make sense when Baylor won last weekend and 3 teams ahead of them lost. So sure. That didn't. I mean, that's not any position. Now, that doesn't mean the Big 12 can't leap Notre Dame. That doesn't mean that at all, because I think when you're that close, there's certainly the possibility. Number one, Notre Dame needs to absolutely destroy Stanford this weekend.
Correct.
Number one. Correct. And I think that Notre Dame needs I think they need Oklahoma State not to be the Big 12 champ. Because the fact that they have Oklahoma behind a 2-loss Baylor team, because, hey, they can't say head-to-head is the reason why, right? You can't say, well, Baylor's ahead of Oklahoma because they won head-to-head, because that has not been how they've done it this year. They had Iowa ahead of a team that beat them. They had Michigan over Michigan State. They have not been locked into this whole Baylor has one more loss and is still ranked ahead of Oklahoma. The committee clearly doesn't respect Oklahoma.
Look, here's the thing, because I think you're absolutely correct about Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is your worst enemy if you're a Notre Dame fan. Because if they beat Oklahoma this week, okay, that means they have a top 10 win on their resume. Okay, a second
because they beat Baylor, right?
They beat Baylor, and then they're going to have Baylor in the Big 12 championship, and they'll have another. So they'll have 3 top 10 wins on their resume with 1 loss.
Right.
I feel.
And a lot of people will talk, Vince, about their 1 loss is an unranked. We've said it all along. They don't care about who you lost to as much as who you beat.
Right.
And the
three
fact that
top 10
Notre Dame
wins.
had a better loss than Oklahoma State won't matter. The fact that they lost to a 6-5 Iowa State team does not matter.
Right.
It's going to be about who they beat, and they would have
Absolutely.
3 top 10 wins. Now, there's a lot of other factors that go into it. This is why it's important that Purdue get into the top 25, because if Notre Dame has 2 ranked wins and Oklahoma has 3, Oklahoma State has 3, because here's what will happen is they look at your ranking based on where you finish. If they beat Oklahoma and they beat Baylor,
they both drop out of the top 10.
More top 10 wins.
Fair enough.
But they'll still have top 10 to 15-ish wins.
Yeah.
They'll have 3 of them.
Which are better than Notre Dame's.
Now, you could say, well, Wisconsin's going to continue moving up. But if Wisconsin loses to Ohio State or Michigan, then they'll fall behind those teams. So you need Purdue to jump into the top 25. And what you need, Oklahoma State, whoever wins the Big 12, if it's Oklahoma or Oklahoma State, first of all, if you're a Notre Dame fan, you are a Dave Aranda Baylor fan, essentially. Right? Because if Baylor wins the Big 12, this isn't going to matter.
It doesn't matter.
A 2-loss Big 12 team is not getting in over Notre Dame. It's just not going to happen. I think the other thing that's number 1 scenario. Number 2 scenario is you want Oklahoma to win the Big 12. That's your second favorite scenario, because I don't see Oklahoma going from 10 all the way up to 4 ahead of Notre Dame
in 2 weeks.
Because their overall resume is really poor.
Right. I think everybody needs to be an Oklahoma fan this week, because if Oklahoma State loses, I feel a lot better about it. Don't you?
I feel better, but then you have an Oklahoma State rematch. I'm not sure how that's going to go. I get what you're saying, because like, to me, I kind of want to see Oklahoma State play Baylor and then have Baylor win. That's how I would feel better about it. Like, to me, I would feel better, Vince, if Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma, then Oklahoma's out. Now there's only one potential Big 12 team, right? Which would happen if Oklahoma wins.
Sure.
But then now you've got Oklahoma State playing Baylor. I'm a big believer that it's hard to win rematches. Now, we've seen it before.
Sure.
We saw Oklahoma beat TCU twice. What was it, 2017 to win the Big 12? I think 2017 or 18, they beat TCU twice, once in the regular season, once in the title game. But we saw Texas beat Oklahoma in the regular season, then Oklahoma beat Texas in the championship game. I don't know if Oklahoma State's capable of beating Baylor twice. I don't. Not on a neutral field, because last time they beat them, I believe it was in Stillwater, correct?
Okay. Yeah, I believe that is accurate.
Yes, it was home against Baylor. They beat them 24-14. You play them on a neutral field. Baylor's playing really good football right now. Really good football, as is Oklahoma State. That's going to be a heck of a game, right? So, to me, Oklahoma winning out would be obviously not as good as Oklahoma State winning out, but I'd still rather Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma and then Baylor beat Oklahoma State. I still think that's the best scenario, because I'll feel better about that than I would Oklahoma being 12-1. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know it does.
But to your point, Vince, if Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State, I still feel better than if Oklahoma State
right.
Because if
the
Oklahoma State
clearly
beats
doesn't like Oklahoma.
No. If Oklahoma State beats Oklahoma, I'm going to be nervous for a week. If Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State, I'm feeling a whole lot better.
Yep, right.
Although you could then say, and we'll have to hear from the talking heads at ESPN, well, clearly Oklahoma now has that big top 10 win, et cetera, and that kind of thing. But it's so, yeah, for me, when I look at the Big 12, for me, it's Oklahoma State beat Oklahoma, and then Baylor beat Oklahoma State.
Sure.
That would be the ideal scenario.
They all cancel each other out.
Because the way it works
is
for
the Big 10.
Right.
Right? I mean, it's the same situation. Ohio State beats Michigan, they're out. Then Wisconsin beats Ohio State, they're out. Now the Big 10's out.
Hold on a second. I'm not sure if I got this correct.
All right.
Actually, because if Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State, you'd have 3 Big 12 teams with 2 losses. I don't know what the tiebreakers would be.
If Oklahoma beats Oklahoma State, Oklahoma only has 1 loss.
So then it would come down to 2. So I was right. Then it's 2-loss Oklahoma State,
you were right
2-loss Baylor. Oklahoma State beat Baylor. So yeah, it'd be a rematch.
Right.
So if Oklahoma wins, we get a rematch.
Correct. Yes.
Then
to your
point,
State. Yeah.
But see, again, I don't trust Oklahoma State to beat Oklahoma at all. So I until they do it. I mean, they haven't done well in that series.
Yeah.
So that's going to be an interesting event. But the Big 12 is to me obviously a threat to Notre Dame. I just don't think what we saw today was any kind of the committee maneuvering the Big 12 to pass Notre Dame.
They're all just lumped in there
They
together.
literally just moved up ahead of the
Yeah.
3 teams that lost. That's all. In the same exact order. Oklahoma State, Ole Miss, Baylor. Or no, it was Oklahoma State, Baylor, Ole Miss, and Oklahoma, correct?
Yeah.
So right now, Baylor's the highest ranked 2-loss team, right?
Yeah, that would be accurate.
Which, okay, I get it. You have a win over Oklahoma. You have a win over a highly ranked BYU team. You won both of those games by double digits. I'm fine with Baylor being the top 2 ranked team. I think they've got better wins than Ole Miss does, in my opinion. I don't know if you agree with that, Vince, but I think that they do. And I think if the committee respected Oklahoma, they would have moved them ahead of Ole Miss.
I the only thing I don't want, to be perfectly honest to you, and I'll break it down as simple as possible for me, is I just want Oklahoma State to lose at some point, because I think they're the biggest threat to jumping Notre Dame. I think Oklahoma State's the biggest threat because they're sitting right behind Notre Dame. So if they beat Oklahoma
and they're playing
Baylor,
really good football,
and if they beat Oklahoma and Baylor, I see it happening. And so I think Oklahoma State is the biggest threat. So I'll be rooting for whoever plays against Oklahoma State. That's just how I feel right now.
So,
and
to your
I'll
point,
take my chances
Vince,
with Oklahoma.
Here's the difference between Oklahoma State and Oklahoma, right? Clearly, the committee's not in love with Oklahoma. They had them 8th when they were undefeated.
Right.
And Oklahoma's not playing great football. I mean, and they look at this. They had a ugly win over Kansas. This is their last 4 games. Ugly win over Kansas. Really good win over Texas Tech by 31. Ugly loss to Baylor, where Baylor was clearly the better team. And then you have an ugly win over a 6-5 Iowa State team, right? That's Oklahoma's resume. Now, if they beat Oklahoma State and win the Big 12, they'll be playing a little better. But here's the concern I have about Oklahoma State. If they win out, they have a 52-point win over Kansas, a 21-point road win over West Virginia. Now, these teams aren't good teams, but they're doing what they're supposed to do.
Exactly.
That's the Notre Dame's road 28-3 is not going to look a whole lot better than the West Virginia. It'll be better because one team has a winning record and one team doesn't. But it won't be that much better. Then you have a 46-point home win over a TCU team that beat Baylor the week before that. And clearly the committee loves Baylor. And then you have a 23-0 road win over Texas Tech, that's going to look a lot like the Virginia win. Notre Dame won by 25 on the road over a 6-5 team. Oklahoma State won by 23 on the road against a top 25 team. Their defense is playing not quite as good, but close to as good as Notre Dame's recently. Their defense is better than Notre Dame's on the whole. If you put the whole season, Oklahoma State has a better defense. If you look at the last 3-4 games, Notre Dame's slightly better from a point standpoint, but they're both really good. In the last 4 games, Oklahoma State's given up 23 points. That's pretty good. Now, of course, Notre Dame in the last 3 games has given up only 9, but the 4th game for Notre Dame before that was the 34 against North Carolina. Right. So that was kind of my point. Notre Dame's playing better in the last 3 games. If you look at it on the entire season, which the committee will, they're going to have it. So I think that's why Oklahoma State concerns me, because the committee does seem to be putting a lot of emphasis on how they're playing now, which it should have some bearing on it, how they're playing now. And Notre Dame better hope that's what they're putting emphasis on, because if that's going to be good for Notre Dame, because Notre Dame is just smashing people right now. So I agree with you 100%, Vince. Oklahoma State's the only team that legitimately concerns me about leaping Notre Dame. But I still think Oklahoma could have a better case with 2 wins over Oklahoma State.
It wouldn't overly surprise me if Oklahoma jumped Notre Dame, because they'd have that 13th data point, and they'd have a couple but I fear Oklahoma State way more at this point. And so Oklahoma State needs to go down. That's where I'm at. They need to go down. So but I understand your logic. I totally, because you want everybody to have 2 losses. That way you're not even worried about it. It worries me going into that championship week, just praying that Oklahoma State gets beat. You know what I mean? Like that. I'd rather get beat sooner than later, and take my chances with the next game. So
yeah, that's going to be interesting.
I almost did that, Brian. I appreciate you. I was close.
Got the blocks. You come into this chat. We've proven you don't have to be a Notre Dame fan to be in this chat.
No, not at all.
But don't come in here and act like an idiot. And then we don't got time for that, right? We don't have time for that.
That's right.
Clemson fans, you're 8-3. Go away.
Oh man. Is that who that was? He was a Clemson fan?
I don't know.
He
He was just talking about Clemson.
Oh,
so
yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
So
Either way.
Ohio, Big 12. I mean, again, Notre Dame still needs some help. And this is what I was talking about the other day. Notre Dame still needs some help, right?
They do.
They're not in control. They could beat Stanford by 70 this week and it won't matter. They're going to need some help. They're going to need a couple teams to lose. I don't think that Notre Dame's in this you went out and you automatically get in situation because I don't think it's to your point, Vince, it's not as simple as if Georgia beats Bama and Cincinnati loses, or Michigan loses, Notre Dame's automatically 4. If Oklahoma State goes out there and smacks Oklahoma this weekend and then beats Baylor again, they only got to smack one of them to really impress the committee, in my opinion. I don't think they have to blow them both out. I think they got to smack one of them. But they will have a very strong case to be ahead of them. So they're going to continue to need some help.
Yep.
Now, I don't think Oklahoma State deserves to be ahead of Notre Dame right now. Their resumes are close, but Notre Dame's better.
That I also agree with.
Right.
Yes.
But I think you look at what's left.
Yeah. I think where everybody is slotted 1 through 7 is absolutely appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we could have the debate about Notre Dame and Michigan. And if, like I said, if Michigan was going to win out and everything looked good, smooth sailing for Michigan, that's an argument I'm willing to have.
Mm-hmm.
But I just think it's going to play itself out and it's not going to matter. So I don't want to lose any sleep over it. And so, it's fine. Michigan can be 5 for another week. That's fine until they drop out of the top 10 after Ohio State smokes them. So you look so confused right now.
No, I'm not confused. I just want to I'm going to probably boot this person after I bring it up, but Mariah Carey or Halle Berry, who is hotter? I choose Mariah. What? First of all, why are you bringing into that channel? And that's
a terrible take. That's a
terrible take.
Can I just say that?
Take.
That's a terrible take.
Me? But okay, we're going to put that person on timeout. I mean, if you're going to come in here and troll, at least come with good takes,
at least
right?
Makes sense.
I mean,
come on,
really? Okay,
come on.
All right, so we are here now, Vince. The last 2 weeks are going to be as fascinating of a final 2 weeks as we've seen in the playoff era, in my opinion, because a lot of times we get into these championship weeks and it's Clemson against some garbage Coastal team. It's Ohio State against some, mediocre Big Ten West team, or Ohio State's got 2 losses and they're not a real threat. Only ESPN thinks they're a real threat because, it's the 11-2 and best teams, whatever. It's been kind of decided in the championship week. Like, it's like, okay, we haven't had a lot of situations like we're going to have these next 2 weeks where you have a final regular season and a championship weeks of 2 teams that either stay in or drop out if they win. Because we haven't seen Ohio State and Michigan this high in the playoff era, right? We haven't seen Bama and Georgia. We've never seen, in my opinion, a playoff year where you have this. Now, what was it, 2018, right? It was 2018 that Georgia and Alabama played in the conference title, and Georgia almost won. But that year, Georgia had a 20-point loss to LSU. So you could say that was – I got to remember what the rankings were that year. So this could be the second time that Georgia and Alabama have played each other with a chance. But it's definitely the first time we've seen it to where Bama, to me, was the team on the ropes more so than Georgia was. Because Georgia that year had remember that in 2018 they had that 20-point loss to LSU. And there was a lot of people that thought a 2-loss Georgia team should have got in over 1 loss, or it was an undefeated Notre Dame. You remember that nonsense? Remember that? And a 1-loss Oklahoma, which also is nonsense. But yeah, it was number 2 and number 3 and number 4. Okay, I had that wrong because Bama was 4 that year. So Bama that year had lost to not Texas A&M. Who Bama lose to in the regular season of 2018?
Oh man, you're testing me. Your memory is 1,000 times better than mine.
No, yeah, they were undefeated. I don't know. This can't be right. Did I pull up the wrong box score? So in 2018, they had Bama. Oh, no. Okay. Yeah. No. What was the year they ran the fake punt? Bama ran the fake punt, or Georgia ran the fake punt. Was that 2019? I'm trying to remember. Was it 2017? No, because they didn't play each other in there. Must have been 2018. Yeah. Okay, yeah, they played Georgia in the conference championship game. Georgia was 4. Yeah, I was right. It's 2018. Bama was number 1. Yes, Bama was 1. Georgia was number 4. So that's the roles are going to be somewhat flipped this year.
Sure.
So it's going to be a fat, and then now you have Cincinnati playing a 10-1, 11, potentially 11-1 Houston team. So this is going to have as much conference championship game hype as we've ever seen, because Houston plays at UConn this week. So it's going to be 12-0 Cincinnati unless they lose to. But see, that's the other thing. East Carolina is a team Cincinnati should beat, but they're not a team that Cincinnati can look past getting ready for Houston.
Sure.
Because they can score.
Absolutely.
That's the concern. ECU can score. They're scoring 31.2 points per game, but they've had some breakouts. They broke out and scored 42 at Marshall. They broke out and scored 45 over Temple. They scored 38 at Navy last week. They're a 7-4 team that Cincinnati should spank. I mean, if we're being honest.
Of course they should. But they should have spanked Tulsa and, those other teams earlier in the month too.
Right. So we're going to see what kind of mindset Vince Cincinnati has. Are they looking past and ready for Houston or not? Go ahead.
This past week for Cincinnati was huge for them because they'd scuffled. They stayed able to win, but they were scuffling a little bit. And I think they kind of got things screwed on. They can see the light at the end of the tunnel. They played a complete game on Saturday, which was huge for them because I honestly think if they would have squeaked by on Saturday and still got the win, but if they squeaked by, there's a really legitimate chance that Michigan could have passed them up.
But it wouldn't have, to your point,
again,
you're right, but it wouldn't have mattered. Right. Cincinnati to me was in a win out and you're in mode.
Completely
agree. I think what they've done now is they've eliminated any potential doubt, like people like David Pollack talking about, if Oklahoma State wins out, should they be in?
No, because Cincinnati's undefeated and they did what they were asked to do, and they belong in. And end of discussion. So we
got a super chat, Vince, that I've been holding off on this. Well, let me finish. Well, there's a super chat I've been holding off on because it's going to talk about the worst. Because I want to talk about it because it's the worst case scenario for Notre Dame.
Okay, is that Craig's?
Craig Sebring, super chat. Thanks for that, Craig.
Yes,
Craig, if Alabama beats Georgia and Cincinnati wins and the winner of OSU and Michigan wins the Big Ten championship, all bets are off.
Which means Notre Dame's
the worst.
5.
That is the worst case scenario for Notre Dame because Georgia will stay in. And the fact that so the other day we were talking about how Georgia was not going to have any top 25 wins when it's all said and done. But I forgot about Clemson. Because Clemson's now a top 25 team.
They are.
Now, you could sit there and say, should Notre Dame still be in over Georgia? And we could compare resumes and records, and Notre Dame has a better win, and Georgia would have a slightly better loss and all that. But Georgia's just been murdering people all year.
It won't matter.
I mean, you could argue Notre Dame's resume would be slightly better than Georgia's in regards to quality wins, but all the other metrics of game control and all those type of things to me would still favor Georgia.
Yeah,
Plus,
I agree.
That's where the 13th data point would matter more to me.
Sure.
Because at the end of 12 games, they were 12-0. Notre Dame was 11-1. They had to go play a title game and got beat. Now, yes, they played some, who was that garbage team they played a week ago?
The FBS teams that
Charleston
they play.
Southern.
Yeah,
right.
FCS,
it's ridiculous, but it is what it is, right? That I think would keep Georgia in. Now, the only exception would be, and this is what I said the last week, is if Alabama just destroys Georgia, then we could have it'll be more of a debate, right? Because I'm a believer. It's like I said this in 2017 when Notre Dame got blown out by Miami. That was one of those weird years where there was still a chance if some crazy stuff happens. People are arguing that Notre Dame could still have a backdoor chance. I thought that was absurd. You get blown out the way that Notre Dame did in 2017, even if they'd have beat Georgia at the beginning of the year, I have a hard time seeing a team get destroyed like that and argue you should be in the playoff.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, that's
fair. It'd be an interesting discussion at that point.
I just don't see it happening. I don't think
exactly.
I think Bama can move the ball on Georgia. I'm not saying they're going to. I'm saying they can. But they're not. It's not going to be like 42-14. And let's be honest, last few times they played, Bama has not spanked Georgia.
Right.
I mean, Georgia should have beat them in 20. They blew that lead late. Remember the stupid punt safe and all that other stuff. They went to overtime in the 2017 title game. I mean, these have been battles between these two teams for the most part. So I just don't see now that Georgia's got its best team since 2017, and I still think the 2017 team was better than this team. I think because that team was so good on offense as well.
Yeah.
This team's better on defense slightly, but that team was so much better on offense. But, to me, Vince, I look at it and I say, I just don't see them.
Yeah,
I don't see them falling unless they get blown out. This would be the worst case scenario
for Notre Dame. If you're a Notre Dame fan and this occurs, you're at 5.
Unless Bama loses to Auburn.
Well,
which I do not see happening.
That's fair. Right. I don't see that happening
because Bama's already clinched the West. They're in no matter what happens. Auburn
with Bo Nix being out and being in a backup quarterback situation, I just have a hard time seeing Auburn beating Alabama.
And I know it's at Auburn, but it
doesn't matter.
I don't think it will. I don't.
I mean, we'll see what happens, but I don't think it's going to matter either.
Yeah, and Auburn's not playing. Case. I mean, they've lost 3 games in a row. They just lost to South Carolina.
Right.
They lost at home to Mississippi State. I mean, you gave up 43 points to Mississippi State. I don't think last week against South Carolina, they looked like a team that was still shell-shocked from losing a 28-3 lead to Mississippi State.
Yeah.
They didn't look like emotionally they recovered from that. I don't think that they bounce back and beat Bama. I just don't. Now that would change everything.
That would absolutely change everything.
I don't care if Bama wins the SEC. They're not getting in with. They should not get in with 2 losses.
They should be out. I agree.
Yeah.
And
Georgia would still be. It'd be Penn State, Ohio State from 2016. Vince is what that would be to me. And do you agree with that?
Yes, 100%.
2-loss Big Ten champ didn't get in. Ohio State still did. Georgia would still belong in my opinion, in that scenario. Yep. Here's a question for you. Let's say Auburn loses to Georgia, or Alabama loses to Auburn.
Okay.
And then Bama smacks Georgia. Does that change it at all? Do you still put them both in? Do you just put Bama in? Do you keep Georgia? I still think Georgia would be in.
I think Georgia's still in.
Smacked by like 17. Not blown out.
I think Georgia's still in. They may be a 3 or 4.
I think Georgia's got to lose by 30 or more.
Yeah,
to not be
I agree, and I don't see that happening. They may lose, but I don't see them losing by that kind of margin.
Even if I agree. That would be a fluky of all fluky games,
right?
Because I don't think Alabama's good enough on defense to make that happen. I think Georgia's going to run the ball on Bama and hit a couple big shots, and if they lose, it'll be 30-24.
Sure. It's not going to be a 30-point win. It's just not.
But Craig is right though, Vince. That would be the worst case.
And then it doesn't even matter. You're not even worried about the Big 12 at that point because if they jump you, they're 5, you're 6, you're 6. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It matters not at all at that point. So whatever.
You can pull the next one up.
It's Final Four or bust. Corey D with the next super chat. Thanks, Corey. Says bottom line: root for Bama and Cincinnati to lose. And for Baylor to win the Big 12, ESPN is a joke. Chris the Bear and Pollock are ND-hating clowns. If this happens, if Bama, root for Bama and Cincinnati to lose. So
he's rooting for those 2 teams. No, he's rooting for those teams to lose, I think.
Okay, so if Bama loses, they're out. Cincinnati loses, they're out. So now you've got Georgia, Ohio State, maybe even Notre Dame at 3 now.
In that scenario, Notre Dame's a 3 seed.
That's right. Notre Dame's a 3, and they've got Ohio State, which I think is juicy as all get out.
Now, that would be interesting for who's your 4.
Right. Because then what happened in the Big 12? We don't have that answer on this scenario.
Well, he said Baylor wins the Big 12.
Oh, well, then they're all 2 losses.
Right.
So who's your 4? That's a really good question.
I think they would put Baylor in over Bama at that point in time. If it came down to those 2, because
they're a conference champ.
They're a conference champ, and the committee clearly likes Baylor, and they would have some really good wins under them. I mean, for Baylor to be the champ, right? They would have to beat Oklahoma by 13, which they did. Then they'd have to beat Oklahoma State, which they did. They also have a double 14-point win over a BYU team that's in the top 15. And they would have redeemed their only loss. So
that's a good point.
I mean, they'd have a better resume than Alabama.
Yeah.
I would still make the case for Cincinnati to still be in with 1 loss.
Right. That was going to be my next point. That was going to be my next point because I know the committee doesn't want Cincinnati in the Final Four. I think we've made that abundantly clear, and I think they've made that abundantly clear. But if this all happens, then I think the door is opened again.
You're going to put a 2-loss non-conference champ in Alabama or Michigan, and a 2-loss. Because here's the thing: if Michigan takes Ohio State down to the wire, Michigan's not going to fall very far. It's going to be like 1 spot, maybe 2. again, we're talking about if they just don't want Cincinnati in, and then you
Right.
have the 2-loss conference, the Pac-12, they're the Big 12 champ.
Big 12, yeah.
And you could see how little respect they have for the Pac-12 because, well, and part of it was because Oregon got beat so bad.
Yeah, they got
destroyed.
smoked.
They've got a horrible loss to Stanford under their belt. And again, we made excuses for it, right? I mean, Joe Moorhead and all that. No excuses for what happened on Saturday.
No, they looked unprepared, and they just got out physicaled.
They didn't want to be there.
Yeah, at all.
I mean, some of the tackling that I saw in space in that game was like those guys wanted no part of tackling Utah.
Yeah, it was a bad look for
it.
Oregon.
Looked worse than what I saw from USC in 2017 against Notre Dame.
They deserved to fall the way they did. Yeah, they absolutely deserved it. So we got another super chat from Matt Koistra. You usually pronouncing the things better than
I just went Koistra.
Okay, Koistra. Matt, thank you very much for the super chat. Happy Thanksgiving to the entire Ivy family. Next couple of weeks are going to be fun. Go Irish. You're absolutely right. No doubt about that. Let's see. I think we had another.
We had one more from John Nestler, I believe. Yeah.
Okay. There we go. John Nestler. Thank you very much, John. He says, which of the obvious teams that are going to be in the playoff would you feel most confident in beating?
Cincinnati.
Yeah, right? Yes. Very confident that they would beat Cincinnati right now. Very. And I apologize to Hunter, but that's just the way I feel. Because right now, Cincinnati is a team that is obviously going to get into the playoff if they win out, and they should win out. They'll be favored in all their games.
Cincinnati would be one. Oklahoma State would be another, again, assuming they win out, and let's say Bama loses and Cincinnati loses and Oklahoma State gets in over Cincinnati. Just trying to throw some teams out that could potentially be in. I definitely think Notre Dame could beat Oklahoma State. I think that's a good matchup for Notre Dame. Their defense is good, but I think the Notre Dame offense matches up better against the Oklahoma State defense than the Oklahoma State offense matches up against the Notre Dame defense, if that makes sense, right? Then after that, it comes down to Georgia, Ohio State, and Alabama. I think Bama's a team that I would like that matchup better than the other two. Yep. Of those three, I would be less they're all good teams, and you could lose to all of them.
Of course.
Right? We're just saying Bama would be third, Georgia would be 2, and Ohio State would be 1. That to me, because again, football is a game of matchups. And so it doesn't matter if I think Georgia would beat Ohio State or Ohio State would beat Bama. None of that matters. It's about how they match up against Notre Dame's specific strengths and weaknesses as a football team. And to me, teams that can really score are teams that concern me more. And right now, I have a lot more confidence in the Ohio State defense than I do the Alabama defense.
Kidding me?
In regards to make stops against Notre Dame. So the Ohio State right now is because, Notre Dame's secondary is kind of okay. And will Kyle Hamilton be back or not? I mean, I would think he would be if they're in the playoff. That's my prediction. If Notre Dame's in the playoff, Kyle Hamilton's going to play. If they play in the New Year's Six Bowl, we've seen the last of Kyle Hamilton in Notre Dame uniform.
Oh, that's the next.
But that doesn't automatically mean. Oh, there you go, Dennis Rydell. Great minds.
well done, Dennis. Thank you.
To me, Ohio State, you could use Kyle Hamilton to take out one of their receivers and Cam Hart to take out another, and you still got another dude you have to deal with who's every bit as good as the other two.
Right.
I mean, that is just – and then you've got to deal with TreVeyon Henderson.
Yet none of them are Biletnikoff finalists, I believe.
Well, I mean, to me, I somewhat understand that because it's kind of like, are they all great individual players or are they all some of their parts, right?
Okay.
The other part about it, too, is none of those guys necessarily have monster stats, right? And these individual awards are about stats, right? It's part dominance and all that, but it's also about stats. And when I look at it, I mean, Jackson Smith-Njigba is Ohio State's leading receiver with 69 catches, 1,100 yards, and 6 touchdowns. A lot of people would argue that he's not even their best receiver. He has their best stats, but that's because teams are focusing on others. But David Bell has 87 catches for 1,207 yards and 5 touchdowns. Here's the thing. It's a whole lot easier to defend David Bell than it is Jackson, the other kid, because David Bell's all you got to worry about. Whereas the Ohio State's like, you can't take any of those guys out of the game. And then Garrett Wilson has 60 catches for 939 yards, 11 touchdowns. And then Chris Olave has 58 catches for 848 yards and 13 touchdowns. So again, I come back to the point of the thing that you have to look at when you're contemplating David Bell, for example, in that matchup, because David Bell was the guy from the Big Ten that was a Biletnikoff finalist.
Right.
David Bell's numbers are better. He's done it with way worse quarterback play, and there's nobody like the other two to take pressure off of him. I mean, most of the people that are complaining about that couldn't even tell you who Penn State's tight ends or Purdue's tight end's name is, and they don't know who Milton Wright is or Jackson Anthrop. Those are the guys that David Bell's counting on to take pressure off of him.
Yeah.
And it hasn't mattered because no one's been able to stop him except for Notre Dame. I mean, that's it. The only team that's been able to stop him this year is Notre Dame. He's literally had, just Notre Dame and Wisconsin. Those are the only two teams that could stop him this year. I mean, he's been really good. And even against Ohio State, he had 11 catches for over 100 yards. His team was completely outmatched, and he still went for 100.
Yeah.
So to me, I understand that more than a lot of people do. I get that because it's. I often ask, are they all elite individual players, or is it they're all a sum of their the sum is better than the individual parts? Part of me wonders if that's the case. I kind of felt that about the Alabama receiving corps a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
I thought Jerry Jeudy was great, but is Jerry Jeudy really a guy that's an elite player by himself? He's been good in the NFL when healthy, but he hasn't been great.
Right.
Jalen Waddle's been good and great. Henry Ruggs, before the craziness that happened with him recently, he wasn't really doing a whole lot in the NFL. But when you can only defend one of them at a time, it makes them a whole lot better. So I somewhat get that. When that's not nearly. I feel
have the John Mackey Award conversation.
Yeah, that's the word. That to me, that's worse than not having one of those guys in there.
Right.
Or not having Kyron.
Watching film.
Yeah, having Kyron in there. I mean, to me, that's a bigger bad take than.
And I'm not saying Kyron should win it, but he should have been a finalist.
Yes.
Okay.
Agree.
That's what I'll say there.
Agree.
I feel like Michael Mayer should have had an opportunity to win it.
I think Michael Mayer has a stronger case than Kyron does because there are some really good backs in the country. I mean,
sure.
Kenneth Walker's having a great year, although he didn't have a very good game this weekend. But Kyron didn't have a very good productive game in the biggest game Notre Dame had against Cincinnati.
Or
Cincinnati. Wisconsin was terrible. I'm talking about the big game, big game.
Yeah, that ended up being
two best teams that they've played. He didn't do anything. Now,
exactly,
it's not his fault.
Not saying it was.
I know. I'm just speaking.
No, absolutely.
Right? I'm not saying it's his fault. But look, when you look at him, Kenneth Walker, you look at what Abram Smith has done at Baylor. Brees Hall at Iowa State has great numbers. I mean, there's some really good backs this year, and Kyron's numbers just don't stack up. Even when you put the whole, the all-purpose yards and all that kind of stuff in there, he just doesn't have top 5 running back numbers. He is 20th in the nation in all-purpose, which includes rushing, receiving, punt, and kick returns. And so it's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14th among all running backs. So I get that one more. Michael Mayer ranks 4th in receptions and 5th in yards amongst tight ends and missed a game. You know what I mean? So that
if you're just looking at the numbers,
yes,
watch the film,
right?
For the love of all that's good and holy, watch the film.
Yeah, there was the Mackey Award one was the screwiest of all of them,
man,
because there was a couple tight ends that should have been on there. That you're like, what the? Wow, okay. Did you guys watch any tight ends this year?
Right. I
didn't understand that one at all. I kind of felt like part of it was they just went with some guys that were ranked high at the beginning of the season and just didn't really pay attention to film.
Right.
That's kind of how I felt.
That's exactly right.
To be honest with you.
Could not believe.
But it is what it is. We got any more super chats, Vince? We got one from Jordan.
We have one more. I got to scroll back up. Here it is from Jordan Wendell. Thank you, Jordan. Really appreciate it. He says, I will be back in the South Bend area this week for Thanksgiving. Yeah, so will I. Give me Bama. Give me Bama. They've underwhelmed me, and we need that payback. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving to you, Jordan. Hey, look, if Notre Dame's in the playoff, I don't care who they get. They got a shot. And somebody down here, I don't know if I could even find it. Let's see.
What would they say?
Well, they said something along the lines of, if Notre Dame gets in this year, they got a better shot at winning a game, more so than in the past, just because of how well the defense is playing, because of the D-line specifically. the front seven's playing really, really well right now. Here we go. It was Alan Watson. He says, if we make the playoffs this year, I like our chances better than in years past. Our D-line is legit.
Yes. Be ready to pull that back up, Vince, real quick. Kustra.
Oh,
let's remember that because Matt's asked questions before.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I will try to remember
so we're both wrong.
Thank you, Matt.
We're both wrong.
Here we go. Jay Wiki Jr. Says, completely random question, but with James Franklin getting the big deal, are you at all concerned that USC might now target Free? They may target him.
I don't see him taking that job.
But yeah, exactly. They may target him.
I've said this every single time there's a USC opening. I'm going to say it again.
Please.
Why is it that every time there's an opening at USC, they always end up hiring their fourth or fifth best option? Because that's not as attractive as a job as the media and fans think it is. There's a reason they had to settle for Pete Carroll. Now, that ended up working out pretty stinking well, right?
Yes, it did.
And they chose to hire Lane Kiffin, but there was they didn't want Sarkisian was not their top choice. They settled on Sarkisian, right? And Clay Helton clearly was not their top choice. They tried to replace Clay Helton last year, but nobody wanted the job. Chris Peterson's turned him down twice. I don't think that it's there's a lot that goes into that job. There's a lot of stuff you have to deal with if you're the head coach at USC that a lot of people are just like, I don't deal with that. And I'm going to tell you something right now. In the coaching circles, there is a stigma about California players. Maybe right, maybe wrong, but it's a stigma that exists about the toughness of California players. It's just there. And that's going to factor into how attractive that job is as well. Are those kids really passionate about football? Now, I think that's like with anything. I think you can find kids from Florida that aren't passionate about football. You can find kids from California and Texas. I watched Jaden Mickey play, and that's a kid that's physical and passionate about football.
Yeah.
But I understand where that stigma comes from in some regards, but that's what's out there. That's the perception that's out there. But I think the James Franklin deal is hilarious.
It's
the dude's 11-9 in the last 2 years. If they lose to Michigan State,
10-year extension.
Yeah. And I'm so tired of the sanctions thing. Like they're 10 years removed from the sanctions. Okay.
Right.
Like James Franklin without Saquon Barkley has been a very mediocre football coach.
Yeah.
James Franklin without Joe Moorhead has been a very mediocre football coach. I mean, can we be honest about that? He went 11-3, 11-2, and 9-4 with Saquon Barkley. He had a 11-2 season. And then the last 2 years since Saquon's been gone and Trace McSorley's been gone and Joe Moorhead's been gone, they're 11-9.
Let me ask you this. What is Michigan State's record the past 2 years?
Michigan State didn't play a whole lot last year. So
I know,
let me find that one out.
I think they won 2 games.
Let me see here.
Michigan
State was 2-5.
Okay.
And so that now they're 9-2. So they're 11-7.
10-year extension.
But that's different.
I know. I'm just saying.
That's a completely different scenario because, number one, you have a coach that people actually wanted. And number two, you have a coach that's quickly building something. James Franklin did not do that. And people say, well, sanctions. Hey, Mel Tucker walked into a situation with a lot of drama and stuff going on too. And he had to completely
it was a lot of drama.
The roster. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a lot of drama. There was somebody in the athletic department, one of the athletic directors at Michigan State, who is now a high school athletic director because he didn't want to deal with all the crap that was coming their way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I realize that's a very isolated example, but the point is that Michigan State was dealing with stuff too. Right.
And Bill O'Brien was there for 2 years after the Joe Paterno stuff. Now, I know the sanctions didn't come right away, right? The sanctions came later, but the stigma was there. And the sanctions weren't like these punishing SMU type of sanctions. I mean, they weren't. They were mostly financial. But, it's kind of funny to me but I think that's good for Notre Dame because James Franklin at Penn State just does not worry me at all. He'll get some recruits from now and then, but he doesn't concern me at all.
I got one more question here, and it's a little off topic. Are you willing to go there?
Yeah, of course.
Here we go. Bob Sackham. Anybody find out how the spending the Thanksgiving money went?
Still working on it.
Thing, man.
So there's a reason I wasn't on the show today, and part of the reason I didn't do a show yesterday is I've just been on the phones trying to find people that have a need. So yesterday, I was able to finally work with the YWCA. They have a women's shelter, and they have they're going to have 100 people at on their Thanksgiving dinner on Thursday. So we went out today and spent about $1,000 on them. And then we've also been able to find some local South Bend families that have a need. Vince helped me find those. And so we're getting their Thanksgiving needs and we're meeting them. We've got a couple more places that are going to work with us and that we still have things we have to buy. So we're about 30% spent so far. I have talked to a couple of the bigger donors because it's easier to just talk to them about it. We've had a lot of people, because the lesson I learned, Vince, was if we're going to do this next year, late October, early November is when you work with people about what your needs are.
Sure.
Because they've had their needs met by some other people, or they went out and had to do it themselves because they were getting so close to the time. So we still have two other like mission places, like homeless shelters that we still have to fill their need. I'm going to do that tomorrow. We have a couple of families we're going to do tomorrow. St. Margaret's has given us a list of, they are really in need of some supplies that for their place. So we're going to do that as well. But we've had some people reach out and say, hey, look, we really have nothing for Christmas right now. We really need some help with Christmas. And I said, I can't do that right now because I told people this is a Thanksgiving thing.
Right.
So what I have done with them is I've actually reached out to some of the bigger donors, because it's easier to get permission from 5 or 6 people than
175. Yeah. Right.
And said, hey, look, here's the need that people have been asking for. So like the Salvation Army has a Christmas need. The USO has a Christmas need.
Oh, sweet.
So we're doing something tomorrow for someone from the Marine Corps League. We're buying their Christmas or their Thanksgiving dinner. So there are still some things there. So we're doing veterans group, children's groups. The Boys and Girls Club wants to work with us, but right now their need is for Christmas. So if some of these donors give us the okay, then we're going to convert some of that to start, next week, going out and just getting the Christmas stuff now, food and different things like that. So that's what I've been doing the last couple of days. That's why I wasn't on the show today. So I appreciate everyone's patience, and Sean and Vince obviously took care of it for me, but yeah. So let's go through and answer some of these questions, Vince. I know, and let's stick to the playoff one here for now. We'll get to the recruiting ones at the end.
Always like the Thanksgiving updates, though. So that was good stuff.
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah, and by the way, so D-Rock says follow Brian on Twitter. He is sending photos out on his groceries. Yeah, so what I've done is, as I told you all from the beginning, it was going to be about full transparency. And so that's what we've continued to do. So I'll just share this real quick, Vince. So I'm just going to do this real quick. So like this is from today. So this is one of the shopping sprees from today. And so this is all goes out on my Twitter feed. So you can see we got two. So there was a great deal at Meijer today. They actually were 99 cents a pound. I bought two 25-pound birds for $25, which a week ago that would have cost like almost $50.
Yeah,
the way that prices were. So this was also from today. So you see now in those boxes on the right, so looking your right, are all spiral hams. So it's 5 boxes of spiral hams. You see the rolls, you see all the pies, and they're making green bean casserole. So you see that's the French's fried onions on there, and then of course we've got, this is from the other day. This was for Faith Mission. You can see all the hams that they had in there, and so we've that's Dennis. He came and met us.
He was with the box truck.
Yeah. So we had so much stuff from there. Like we thought we were gonna have to kind of mix and match, but like the Gordons out in Elkhart had everything we needed, and I brought one car. Like we thought we were gonna have to like take some and go get more. So they actually met us out there with their truck and met that need. So we've been out doing that and doing a lot of that. So it's been going really well. It's been a lot of fun. And here's the last one. So we this was for Hope Mission in South Bend. It works with homeless people. This is a drop off we did it was like 9 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night. And then they couldn't get those big freezers right there behind. They couldn't find the key for it. So I had to take all the meat back home and bring it back the next morning.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, that was but yeah, so that was a little bit of a pain. So you can see like all the turkeys and stuff back there, all the meat back here. I had to take that home And
I don't know how you would have found.
Yeah.
There's no way I could have found
Yeah.
room in my freezer.
Yeah. And
Wow.
then we also Hannah's house, we got them a turkey and got them some stuff, but they wanted fresh produce. Well, when we went to shop for them on Friday, a lot of the fresh produce was like, sell by 11:24, 11:25. So I said, hey, we'll go get you some produce on Wednesday, the day before Thanksgiving, and we'll bring it over.
Yeah.
So we see how to meet their need as well. But it's been a lot of fun, and still a lot to do. But it's gonna be a lot of fun. Yep. So real quick, I want to reach out to Brew All Day. Do me a favor, I'm going to put my email address down here. So if you know of people that have need, email me and we'll talk. So yeah. All right. So Vince, let's get back to some questions. Let's get back to some college football playoff questions.
Yeah. Okay. So you want playoff questions? All right. Let me.
Why? What is the other ones about the recruiting stuff?
Recruiting stuff.
I don't have. Look, you can bring up the super chat because somebody did super chat. And
that was way at the top, wasn't it? It was like the first thing.
Yeah, that's where I thought we were going to start over and kind of work through the questions at the beginning.
10-4. We can definitely do that. Here we go. Super chat from AJ. Says, sorry for starting off topic, but could you shed a little light on the latest with CJ Williams? Please tell me this is not a Dell botching another one.
I've heard a lot of different stories about this, none that I care to share because none of them are close enough to the situation to make me feel comfortable. And I could easily tell you them and it would be taking a shot at Dell, but I don't trust this. Not that I don't trust the sourcing, but it's not close enough to the situation that I feel comfortable saying it. I don't think they've done a great job with this. I'm concerned that this is going to be a little bit like the Deion Colsey situation where the position coach kind of didn't contact him as much as he did leading up to the commitment, which you can't do with top players because other schools aren't going to stop recruiting them.
You got that right.
And, USC's been inviting him to every game and UCLA's been inviting him to every game. And that's about as much as I'm comfortable telling you. There was a story out tonight from Greg Biggins, who's about as tied into West Coast recruiting as anyone that you're going to find. He works for, I believe Greg's with 247 Sports still, but he is in my opinion, the best West Coast recruiting analyst around. And he said CJ told him, this is me just telling you what was in the story. That's why I'm giving you Greg Biggins' name because he's the one that has the scoop. This isn't mine. But he said CJ told him he's solid in his commit to Notre Dame, but he's going to take visits to USC and UCLA. If you're taking visits, you're not solid. I mean, you can say you're solid, but if you're Tobias Merriweather's solid, he's not taking any visits. Jadarian Price is solid. He's not taking any visits, right? When you're solid and you're taking visits, you're not really solid, right? Now, they still may get him, but that's obviously a concern. And it's not a surprise. And I've heard, stories where it's the quarterback and, a story where, Notre Dame told him that they're going to take some transfer receivers, which I think is absurd if that's actually true.
Ridiculous.
Number one, you don't need grad transfer receivers until you find out if your guys aren't coming back.
Right. Exactly.
So
if you get Davis, Lindsey, and Austin back, what are you taking grad transfer receivers for? You don't. That's such a waste. Such a waste. Because you're going to put these young guys who are potentially taking you to the playoff, and you put them back on the bench.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's about all that I can speak to on that. I mean, that's what's out there. I don't have anything different than what's out there. I'm not honestly, Tom Loy, if you follow Tom Loy, he's going to give you closer to that. I don't have any sources that are really connected to CJ. Tom's going to have sources better than that. I'm just going to be honest. Right. So, and that's going to change once we make our recruiting hire, which I'm working on. I've talked to a few people. I'm going to be very picky with that hire, but I've got a couple people that express interest. I'm hoping to get even more after Thanksgiving. But right now, I think Tom's pretty, I would say, pretty cued in on this one. He's about the only Notre Dame recruiting person that I would pay any attention to on this one. Other than that, listen to what Greg Biggins has to say, because Greg is like I said, he is the best West Coast person. And then real quick, I want to address this. Thad Farley says, is it too late to donate? Yeah. Thad, we've only got about 30% of the money we have spent. Yeah. But hey, listen, if you want to help, we're going to make this an annual thing. We're also going to try to do some other things throughout the year where we're going to try to help people out in different ways. So appreciate your willingness to help. I would say if you really want to help, there's whatever community you live in, there's people say, hey, you know what? I didn't get a chance to give money, but my wife and I are going to go down and volunteer at a homeless shelter on Thanksgiving. help your community, right? You all have done a great job helping us help our community. If you still want to help, then I'm sure there's places in your own community that could use the help. Otherwise, if you're not able to do that because it is so late, we will be doing things like this again, and we appreciate your willingness to help.
I think there's 3 super chats at the bottom if you want to grab those while I'm up top.
Kevin Fetters, want to have all the help. I realize Notre Dame doesn't control destiny, but rooting for chaos so we don't have to worry about getting in. Yep.
The more chaos, the better, baby.
Yep.
You're not wrong. Yeah, you want upsets galore, except for Georgia, Alabama. I do not want an upset there. I want chalk.
Unless Georgia
right.
Bama loses to Auburn.
Which,
because I'm not going to bring up Georgia losing to Georgia Tech because that's not happening.
That's not going to happen.
Georgia could have 15 guys out with COVID and still going to beat Georgia by 4 touchdowns. It's going to
not by 55.
Yes. Corey D says, several weeks ago, Tim Priester from Irish Illustrated reported that Notre Dame will make changes with wide receiver coaching staff. Dell, is this still true? He also said that they were going to make changes on the offensive line coach. Does Brian Kelly's comments about Jeff Quinn sound like a guy that's going to be making changes after the season to his offensive line coach? No, I don't. I'll believe Brian Kelly's going to make the changes when he makes the changes.
Exactly.
Simple as that, and I don't really feel it's fair to Dell for me to continue to talk about whether he is or isn't going to get fired. If Brian Kelly makes that decision, we'll talk about it. Until then, he's still the receivers coach.
Correct.
And I'm going to evaluate the job he's doing. It's not very good. It needs to get better, or he needs to find somebody else who can do it. But again, we've seen Brian Kelly bring coaches like this back.
Time and time again.
Yeah. So
don't hold your breath.
Yeah. Christopher Fowler says, should we technically be in front of Bama? We have the better loss. I feel like am I wrong? Yes, you're wrong, because you should never be ranked ahead of something. This is a good question, Christopher. You should never be ranked ahead of a team because you have a better loss, unless everything else is equal. And to me, not everything else is equal. Bama's, to me, has more impressive wins, not just beating Ole Miss, but beating Ole Miss convincingly. Whereas I don't think Notre Dame beat Wisconsin convincingly. They were losing 13-10 in the fourth quarter. That game was much closer than 41-13.
Agreed.
They also have a win over Arkansas, which is a ranked team, which is similar to the Notre Dame win over Purdue. I actually think it's Notre Dame's is a little bit better, but Alabama's played a little bit higher level of competition, and Alabama's got some more convincing wins. Now you can say, well, they got some ugly wins over Purdue. Well, so does Notre Dame. 3-point win over Florida State, 3-point win over Toledo, 3-point win over Virginia Tech. 3 teams that don't have a losing record. So you can't really use that. When they've won other games, they've just been more convincing. Bama's just a better team to me. And I don't think the whole better win thing matters a whole lot. And it's not significantly better. It's 4 versus 15. So it's not enough to where, because again, not all other things are equal. So
that's all the super chats, right?
Yes.
Okay. Corey D made a comment that I want you to kind of chime in on. He says, Gary Barta, quote, the committee thinks highly of Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Unquote. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way that they've ranked Notre Dame so far, I think we've always been like one off. I felt like the one off of, boy, they just should have been ahead of such and such, right?
Sure.
I thought they should have been ahead of Wake Forest the first time. They were behind at 10. It wasn't that, 10-9, not a huge deal. Wake was undefeated. Okay, I didn't raise a big stink. I thought they should have been ahead of Michigan, and Michigan State should have been ahead of them. The week after, the following week after Michigan State lost to Purdue. Or was it Michigan State lost to Michigan? I forget how the weeks have all blended together. So I think you could have been here, spot off. But I haven't had huge issues with it because I've understood, even when they had Michigan and Michigan State ahead of Notre Dame, I didn't agree with it, but it made sense.
Yeah.
And so it's not something I'm like, oh, this is ridiculous,
Right.
Like having Michigan ahead of Michigan State. I thought that was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because their resumes were all but equal, except the fact that Michigan State beat them. So I think the committee's been fair to Notre Dame. I think some of the things they've said have been silly and unfair.
Yes.
The first week when he was talking about, they were only beating North Carolina 17-13 at halftime. Really? Like that's we're going to go with what the score was at halftime? You know,
exactly.
How about Cincinnati was tied with Murray State 7-7 at halftime? How about Ohio State was beating Tulsa 13-6 at halftime? Like, you really want to go halftime scores? Really? You know, but other than that, I mean, where they've placed them, they've been complimentary. And as Sean has said over and over again, if it comes down to a Notre Dame and anyone not named like Bama or Ohio State, Notre Dame's going to get the edge more often than not because they understand that Notre Dame equals this.
And that leads right into Christopher LaFaro's comment here. He said, if TV ratings are involved and it comes down to Notre Dame and Oklahoma State, Notre Dame makes it. It's a business. And you're not wrong.
I think to Vince's point earlier, though, Christopher, and I agree with what you're saying completely. If Oklahoma State wins their next 2 games, and at least one of them is convincingly, the resumes aren't really close. At that point, I think Oklahoma State would have a significantly. But now, if they're both really close games, then we're having a different conversation. But if they just go out this weekend and just, you know, let's say they beat Oklahoma State by a touchdown and then just blast Baylor, then they're in my opinion.
I agree.
And I don't care what Notre Dame is at Stanford. It'd be like when TCU beat Iowa State 55-3. Iowa State stunk that year. Ohio State goes out there and beats Wisconsin 59-0, and Ohio State gets in. I didn't like it, but I understood it.
Yeah.
I think it'd be the same thing. But I think we're also need to not – the committee clearly does not value the Big 12. And for all the talk about, well, Notre Dame's not going to get in because of what's happened to them in the past, the Big 12 I don't think has any – the Big 12 has 0 college football playoff wins. And the last time the Big 12 was in the college football playoff, it was an incredibly embarrassing loss. LSU could have hung 100 on them if they wanted to.
Sure.
Like, it was, 62-28?
Yeah, it was.
I mean, it was really bad. Really bad.
I just want to put this up here because it makes me laugh. Patrick Fitzgerald says, remember on the first college football playoff show, ESPN guys said Notre Dame was the only top 13 team without a chance to make it. Great.
They just
analysis.
You'd think if you're constantly wrong about something that you'd eventually just stop doing it. You know, it's like, how often can you be wrong before you say, hey, maybe we should do this differently?
Yeah.
It's
hilarious. And look, they weren't any more complimentary at Notre Dame today. So
right, but again, this is the same committee that thought a one-loss Michigan team. This is the same group of analysts that thought a one-loss Michigan team had a case to be ranked ahead of an undefeated Notre Dame team that beat Michigan. Right? This is the same group of people that thought a 2-loss Georgia team should have got in and a 2-loss Ohio State team who lost by 31 at IU. You remember when Herb Street was making that case?
Yep.
Because Ohio State was playing really well right now, and they're one of the 4 best teams, which he thinks is basically the big names that have the highest recruiting classes. That's what Kirk Herbstreit thinks is one of the best teams. You know, that's why he wanted Georgia to get in a couple of years ago. That's why he wanted Ohio State to get in. Ohio State lost by 31 points to Iowa, and Kirk Herbstreit thought they should have got in the playoff.
Herb stomped by Iowa. I mean, that was wow.
That was bad.
Okay.
And lost at home to Oklahoma that year too, I believe.
Right. Riza has a super chat at the bottom. Brian, if you want to grab that one for me.
That. Riza says, how do we match up with the teams ranked 4-10? Any on there you would really be nervous about if we played them? So we kind of discussed, let me pull my rankings up so I can look at these. We talked about Georgia. I mean, I think Georgia and Ohio State are the 2 toughest matchups, in my opinion, Vince. Would you agree?
Well, it says 4 through 10. So,
right. So we talked about them. We're talking about them. Georgia, Ohio State are the 2 toughest, right? Yep. And then we talked about Bama, and Cincinnati's the one team of the top 4 that we would like to play, right?
Yes. Yep.
And so they're on the cusp. To me, Michigan is an interesting matchup. So you keep saying that, but look, Notre Dame's offensive line, unless you think Notre Dame's offensive line is magically better, I don't love the matchup of Aiden Hutchinson and David Jabo going against Notre Dame's offensive line.
Here's what I do like, though. I think that Tommy Rees has gotten better throughout the season, and he will scheme around those guys.
Yeah,
he
but
will make them a non-issue.
But we have not seen him scheme around the best defensive end tandem in the country. Okay. He's been scheming around defenses that suck. I mean, the best defense Notre Dame has faced in the last month is Navy's.
Okay.
Right? That's fine. It's a different deal. So, yes, he's gotten better.
At the end of the day,
you can't. That's because you hate Michigan.
Well, I also think their offense is god awful, and I
true.
think Notre Dame's defense will dominate them.
Don't agree. Don't disagree. I don't know if they'll dominate them. They'll slow them down. They'll definitely shut them down. I don't see Michigan getting to 21 points. But I also don't think it's a guarantee that Notre Dame's going to get to 21 points. Again, look at what Notre Dame has done offensively against good offenses or good defenses. They've played really 2 top defenses all year. Would you agree with that?
Yes. But that was also the beginning of the year.
Yes, but again, you can't just assume that because they look so much better against teams that suck.
But the play design has been so much better.
I get all that, right? But at the end of the day, it's a lot easier to design plays when you're playing bad defenses. Okay. I agree with everything. Jack Cohn's playing better. They're finally they're doing all the things now that we assumed that they should or shouldn't do, that they should have done at the beginning, right? We agree on that. At the same time, they still got to block Aiden Hutchinson and David Ajabu. Would I pick Notre Dame to win? Of course I would. Do I think it's just I'm not worried about them? No, I'm not saying that at all, because I do think there's enough there to give Notre Dame some problems that, I still need to see Notre Dame just I got to see how they do against that, right?
Look, if we're talking about 4 through 10, the current 4 through 10, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're looking at.
Right.
Michigan would be my second team that I would be afraid of.
Second highest?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Who else would you have?
Ole Miss would be my highest because I'd be worried about
for the same reason Ohio State. Yeah. That's an interesting one too, because they are more of a running team than they are a passing team, in my opinion. If you really watch Ole Miss, they're a really good running team. They're in the top 10 rushing. Would Notre Dame be able to slow them down at all? That would be an interesting thing, because they couldn't. They remind me a lot of a better version of North Carolina. To your point. That's what concerns me. Now, I don't think Matt Corrals is as dynamic of a runner as Sam Howell, but similar. The question in that game would be, can Notre Dame dominate in the trenches? That would be the key, the interesting matchup there.
Sure.
If they can win in the trenches and slow down the run game and get after Matt Corral, he will screw up if you hit him a bunch, in my opinion. Still, I don't trust that kid a ton.
Right.
So that would be an interesting matchup, because they've got good receivers, but they don't have the kind of receivers they've had in the past.
I just think they're balanced, more balanced than
balanced.
A lot of the teams that are in this 4 through 10. I think Ole Miss is probably the most balanced of all of them.
I think Ole Miss and an Oklahoma when it's going right.
Yeah, they're so up and down. That's thing.
Right.
But you're right. If they come and they're on their stuff,
Notre Dame could beat them by 30.
Yeah,
or lose by 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, absolutely.
You don't know what Oklahoma's going to show up.
That's a really good point.
And here's another thing too, that why Michigan would still be my number one.
Okay,
is because Ole Miss. When I look at Ole Miss, I look at Oklahoma. Those lines don't concern me. Michigan's got a very good offensive line, a physical offensive line. That is
that's your difference maker. I can see that,
because it's about matchups
for sure.
But I would not argue with you about Ole Miss. To me, it's like, just which matchup are you more concerned about? But Ole Miss fits more of my overall concern. Vince, you and I have talked about is, can you score? My thing is, though, I think that the difference is I think Notre Dame can score with Ole Miss. To me, it kind of balances each other out. They either win in a high-scoring game or lose in a high-scoring game, but it'd be close. Against Michigan, they either win or lose a low-scoring game. That's going to be close.
Interesting.
That's why to me,
that's fair.
It's similar.
Look.
Baylor doesn't concern me.
Yeah, every team 4 through 10, though, I'm picking Notre Dame to win.
Yeah, Oklahoma State, I just don't. Oklahoma State and Baylor don't have enough offense for me.
Yeah,
and they don't have the dynamic pass rusher that Michigan does. That's the difference. Like the Michigan's got 2 dynamic pass rushers. Baylor and Oklahoma, the thing I love about Oklahoma State, Vince, is why they're really fun to watch. If you're someone who enjoys well-coached defense, I don't think they necessarily have any great players. There's no Zaven Collins like Tulsa had last year. There's just a lot of really good players. And so I kind of feel like at times maybe I don't give them enough credit. You know what I mean? For the success they have defensively in a matchup against Notre Dame, because they don't have that one great game wrecker. But you just look across the board and it's like, I'm looking at tackles for loss, right? 10.5, 10.5, 10.5, 9, 9. There's no great guy. I'm like, oh man, right? There's no guy I see being a top 10 pick like Aiden Hutchinson or David Ajabo, but man, they're just good. They're just good across the board. But I feel like skill-wise, Notre Dame could do some things on them. But they would be another team that would concern me a little bit of if the Notre Dame offensive line hasn't truly turned it around, they would probably be number 3 on my list. But again, the concern I have about them and Baylor, I don't think they can score. I'm more worried about Michigan's offense than I am Baylor or Oklahoma State's. If that makes sense.
That's fine.
And then we talked about Oklahoma State, Baylor, Ole Miss, Oklahoma. We talked about all them. Yeah. Yeah, I know, right?
It happens every now and again, people.
Yes.
Just saying.
Yes.
Kevin Fetters has a super chat. He goes, I want ND to beat Cincy so bad from Cincinnati. They're so anti-Notre Dame. BK since 2009. Rooted for them till the arrogance after the loss.
Let's be honest. If Brian Kelly left for some school, just left Notre Dame like right before, let's say Notre Dame gets in the playoff this year, and Kelly leaves and takes the Florida job, we would feel the same way about Florida until Brian Kelly left.
No question.
And that's what he did. He left them when they were about to go play the biggest game in school history.
Yes.
Now, I understand it, right?
Of course.
But if you're a Cincinnati fan, you don't understand it. And I get that. And he had kind of done the whole, why would I leave? It's like, we all know. Everybody knows you're leaving. Just,
I remember that interview, actually.
Yeah.
Because he did it the night of their awards banquet, like from the banquet hall. Like, I remember seeing it in the background. And he's like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Hey, fellas, we're here to celebrate this team. This isn't a night about this, right? This is about our players. But, but media, they have their job to do. I mean,
exactly. Yeah. Our next super chat comes from our boy Tommy Guns. He says, it's off topic. If and when you move into Christmas buying, Toys for Tots is run by a local Marine Corps reserve unit in the area if you have one.
That is on my list of Toys for Tots and Salvation Army are 2 people on my list. And the Boys and Girls Club are 3 that are on my list for Christmas stuff.
Yeah, and the junior ROTC group at Riley where I work is run by the Marines. It's a Marine junior ROTC, and it's run by a retired colonel. So that is definitely something, because he's unbelievable with those kids, and he's a great guy, and I would love to help them out for sure. So that is not far off of our radar, sir.
Now, here's a comment from Corey D. If Kelly left Notre Dame tonight, I'd sleep soundly. Okay, now there would be some fans like that, but there'd be a lot of fans that, especially ones that have bought into the whole "this is the greatest coaching job he's ever done" thing. That would be upset about that. But it's all about how. I mean, you just do it the right way, and I'd be willing to bet you that if Brian Kelly could go back and do it all over again, he'd do it differently.
Sure, he didn't handle it very well. Yeah, he didn't.
We all have those moments,
but
right?
It is what it is, man.
Yeah.
Just your ordinary Joe. Thanks, Joe. He says, "Hey, Brian, good reference, by the way.
Yes.
Brewster's Millions. In spending all that money, make sure the cranberry sauce is Vince's kind, gelatinous that still shows the can ridges."
Nobody has asked for cranberry sauce. Apparently, it's already been donated. So apparently, a lot of canned goods have already been dropped off.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
but that's hilarious because it's only good in the can for people.
Yep.
Let's be honest. And I think that's all for super chats.
Yes. So let's go back up to the top, and
it's a long, winding road back to the top.
You having some trouble?
Oh, just it's a lot of stuff we've already kind of talked about.
Robin Dennis does. I mean, this is one part we haven't talked a ton about tonight. Notre Dame has to absolutely destroy Stanford. If Notre Dame just wins by 7 or 10, they're done. To me, they're done. The only way that they're in at that point in time, Vince, is if everybody else has 2 losses. Like if they barely beat Stanford, and play ugly, and Cincinnati loses to Houston by a field goal, I would still say you could make the case that Cincinnati needs to be in. Like you need to. Stanford is awful, and I know you guys probably talked about it today, and we'll talk about it tomorrow.
That's why we talked about some other stuff.
They're awful.
Yeah,
they're awful. It is embarrassing, like how bad they are.
Yeah,
they're awful.
I made the comment this afternoon because we were talking about Stanford's offense against Notre Dame's defense, and my comment was, if you think, for all those people out there that think Jack Cohn is immobile, wait till you watch Stanford's offense. Wait till you
Yeah,
watch their
now Tanner
quarterback,
McKee
man.
can sling it now.
He can
sling it,
but he is
and that
not
offensive line has not done a good job protecting him late in the season. That's
man.
been their strength program has just gone way down the tubes.
Man.
I mean, it has gotten bad. But I mean, if you think, here's the deal: last time Notre Dame went out to Stanford, they beat Stanford 45-24. That Stanford team would smash this Stanford team.
Correct.
They had Davis Mills a quarterback. I mean, that was a Stanford team where you looked at and you're like, they weren't good, but they weren't quite as bad as their record indicated. They had a 4-point loss to Cal, 3-point loss to Colorado. They had a loss to 15-point loss to a number 5 Oregon team. That they weren't good, but they weren't awful.
Yeah.
This team is awful.
They're so bad.
I mean,
sorry.
Cal beat them 41-11. Cal is not good.
Since we're going to talk about the Stanford defense tomorrow, I wanted to ask your opinion. Since you're a QB, former QB, coach QBs, what do you think about the Stanford? And his name has escaped me at the moment. Can you help me out?
Their quarterback?
Yeah, their quarterback.
Tanner McKee.
McKee.
Mm-hmm.
His throwing motion just seems to take him a year.
It's just because he's long. He's really long-limbed.
Yeah, it's such a long throwing motion. I feel like
it's a concern now because he can't get rid of the ball quickly.
Yeah,
he'll be fine once he gets some experience. I mean, he played last year, but he went on a mission for 2 years, so he's kind of still getting back into the groove of things.
Okay,
he'll end up being fine. But no, when you have that kind of long release, your anticipation has to be good, and that also hurts him in the pocket because like Jack Cohn's about to get hit, he can just quickly snap that thing off like he did against Georgia Tech. Tanner's like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And
that'll come with experience.
I see strip sack central for Notre Dame this week, but anyway.
He'll get better about that, but it's not going to help him this weekend. And we'll talk. Did you guys talk about? We'll talk about Notre Dame offense tomorrow. But yeah,
correct. Yeah.
That and Walter Rouse is a pretty good player at tackle, but the rest of their offensive line is not good.
Yeah,
not good. And they have way too much talent at receiver and running back to be this bad on offense.
Agreed. Oh, absolutely. He just has no time to do anything.
No time.
Absolutely.
No time. And his ball placement's not great either. I mean, he's going to need time to get better about that too.
No, that's.
I mean, that's why Jack Jones picked him off twice. They weren't bad passes. They were just behind, and Jack Jones was able to make plays on them.
Yeah, that first pass he kind of let that in the air a little longer than he probably should have, and it was too far to the inside. But anyway,
I think that's ball placement.
Yeah,
right? Timing and ball placement. Those are two things you have to work a lot on. And Notre Dame needs to make sure that the timing doesn't happen because of the pressure.
Yeah. Here's a thought game for you from Drew. He says, so if Michigan beats Ohio State, who lost to Oregon, who lost to Stanford, and Notre Dame beats the life out of Stanford this week, Michigan gets ahead? Question mark?
Doesn't work like that.
Man, that is
doesn't work like that.
I wish it did.
The way it works is basically they will compare similar opponents. Not we beat this team, they beat that team, and then this is how the transitive property goes all the way back there. It'd be about comparable opponents. And I believe that Notre Dame and Michigan only have one comparable opponent. Notre Dame actually won by more points, but they're not going to look at that. Michigan was far more convincing in their win over Wisconsin than Notre Dame was. If you just look at the way the game played out and the whole game control thing. And then the other thing too is they would have a win that would far surpass anything Notre Dame has done. If Michigan beats Ohio State and wins the Big Ten, they should be in over Notre. I mean, they would deserve to be in over.
Yeah, and I would have no problem with that. Right. I would be forced to say nice things about Michigan. And I
just would say we're only going to talk about one playoff game.
That's fair. It's fair.
And we're not going to talk about the other game. Could you imagine? I mean, how bad that offense would get destroyed by Georgia's defense?
Yeah,
if they got in.
Well, it's visions of how I see Notre Dame's defense just going up against Michigan's offense.
Well, I think one thing is Notre Dame has the kind of weapons and a quarterback on offense that can somewhat, have some success against it. Michigan does not.
Yeah.
Go ahead. No,
okay. I got one from Rick. He says, man, I really want Notre Dame in the playoffs. I have a feeling Notre Dame will win it all if they get in. This year is different. I think they get in. They will play to their potential and shock us.
So, Rick, I'm not – give me one more week to talk about this. So, we have kind of come up with potential – we have to come up with, show ideas for next week because we won't have a game to match up. I want to see Notre Dame do it one more time. I need to see Notre Dame go out and smack
a full game.
Stanford
full game,
again,
start to
right?
finish, playing the offense.
So last week's game's not a fluke. It's just like you're doing what you're supposed to do to bad teams. If I see that, I'm going to have some very interesting things to say about Notre Dame going into the potential postseason. Because, because to your point, sense. And I'll give you a little preview to your point. Now, yes, the competition stinks, but as we pointed out last week, if you're a good football analyst, Vince is. That's why I hired him and gave him the title of football analyst. And I believe I am. Otherwise, I would find something else to do. If I didn't think I was good, I may suck, you all, but I don't think that I do. You can look at a team and say they won 40-7 and not be impressed, and then watch them play a different team and win 40-7 and say, wow, that was impressive. Because it's not the 40-7. A football coach and analyst is going to be able to break down how they got there. Did you just beat Georgia Tech 55-0 because Georgia Tech's that bad? No, you beat them 55-0 because they stink, but you played like a great team.
You took it to them.
You executed. Exactly. Your scheme was good. Your execution was good. You were physical. Remember, it wasn't but 3 weeks ago. We were talking. One of my concerns about this team was they're just not real physical. They're athletic, but there's just not a lot of popping. Well, that's something we've seen from this defense the last 2 weeks.
Right.
And of course, the Notre Dame running backs. So we know Michael Mayer and Kyron. There's a guy here and there. But even without Kyle Hamilton, who was the only guy laying wood early in the year, this defense is
they're playing with a really confidence,
swagger,
physicality.
They talk a lot, which I like. My dad hates it when guys talk, which is the one thing my dad hated about watching me play because I taled a lot, especially when I got moved to receiver. I didn't talk a lot as a quarterback because I'm not trying to piss off the guys that are about to hit me and I can't protect myself. But when I played receiver, late in my senior high school and as a freshman in college, I talked a lot. And as long as you're Brian Kelly had a great comment on that. As long as it's not, there's a line you can cross and you don't cross it. But this team plays with a lot of confidence, a lot of swagger. But here's my point. I don't know if Notre Dame has had a more impressive November with how they've played under Brian Kelly. And you look at when they made the playoff last year, you look at November and you can say, okay, they won in November. They had a big win over Clemson in November. That game was there were some concerning things in that game. It was a great win and all that, but there's some concerning things in that game. You had a nice win over North Carolina. And when I say November, we're going to include December because it's that down the stretch, right? You didn't look great against Syracuse. Let's be honest. You got your butt whooped by Clemson. There were some chinks in the armor that were apparent last year down the stretch.
Sure.
2018, similar thing. You had a nice big win over Northwestern or Syracuse, but you struggled against USC. Your pass defense in a couple games wasn't great. Northwestern kind of took you down. There were some chinks in the armor for that team. Now you beat better teams that year, but there were some chinks in the armor. And then 2012, you go back and look at how Notre Dame played again in 2012. They barely beat Pitt. They needed double overtime to beat Pitt in November. They played BC. They beat them 21-6. It wasn't a real pretty game. Blew out Wake Forest, which is a good win. They played great that game. But then USC, they didn't play great against a bad USC team. So those teams, to me, never really had a ton of momentum going into the postseason. I think the closest you could say to it was 2018. Was the closest thing Notre Dame had to really good momentum going to the postseason. If Notre Dame does what they should do to Stanford, this is about as much momentum as they've had.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they've played bad teams, but they're playing with an energy level, with a focus. They haven't played. What's been one of the biggest knocks we've had for Notre Dame for a decade? They play, even in games they win, they play down to the level of their competition.
Absolutely.
They have not done that the last 3 games.
Right.
And again, the UVA game, you could say, but that was not the players. That was the coaches pulling the reins back. The defense was still
exactly.
They were popping in the second half.
See,
right?
It was the coaches biggest problem is that the coaches were pulling it back when they should have just let let's go.
Starting in the second quarter against Navy and on, when the coaches have let this team play, they played really
at a high level
on both sides of the ball.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's the difference.
Yeah.
that's the offense is heating up. The defense is heating up right when you want a team to be heating up, which is the end of the year.
Absolutely.
And, even 2015, even if they beat Stanford at the end of the year, that team was still falling. Barely struggled against Temple. They won, but they struggled against Temple. They struggled against Wake Forest. They struggled against BC. That they didn't look great down the stretch. And then, this team is hot.
Yeah.
And I need to see him. I needed to see it for one more game. And then I'm going to have to say, Rick, you could be onto something. And this is the year to do it, right, Vince? This is the year to get into the postseason.
Did we not have a show about this back in the summertime? I mean, just saying, go back and check it out, everybody, because we talked about it. This isn't well, it is surprising to a degree with all the chaos. But overall, we said it. This is an opportunity this year, and there's going to be one. We got some super chats. Let's get to those, and then I may have to wrap up just a little bit. You can hear the Mohicans upstairs. All right. Riza, thank you for the super chat very much. He says, am I the only one who thinks all the Cristobal love is crazy? He's a good recruiter, but they always have multiple dud games a year, and they have more talent than the competition in their conference.
I think that's fair. I think Mario Cristobal is a good football coach. I think he's the Pac-12 version of James Franklin.
Ooh.
He's a slightly better game day coach.
Sure.
But he hired Joe Moorhead. And Joe Moorhead's helping him turn things around, right?
That's fair.
And I think the part that Riza points to that is the duds. Everybody kind of has duds. I mean, Alabama has duds. Notre Dame has duds. A lot of times you win those duds. What's happened against Oregon that I think is problematic for me is a lot of those duds have happened in big moments. And that's the difference. Like Alabama will not show up against LSU or Arkansas. They're showing up against Georgia. They're showing up against, top teams, right? Not so much with Oregon. And the thing that gets me too is there have been games in recent years where they just have been flat out physical events.
Yeah.
And that to me is the thing that surprises me the most for Joe Moorhead team. With the exception of that Rose Bowl a couple years ago with Justin Herbert. And that's the other thing. You had a generational quarterback you lost Arizona State. I mean, they have a shot at the playoffs with Justin Herbert if they don't lose to don't lose to Arizona State. So I think he's a good coach. I think a lot of the hype is I agree. But here's the question. Here's the problem in defense of the media, Vince and Riza. Who is the guy that's out there? I mean, that's the thing is jobs
there's
are open.
So many high profile, in theory, high profile jobs that are open, and there's not a whole lot of high profile.
This is why you don't make fires in season unless you know my philosophy on you don't fire a coach unless you have an idea of who you're going to have to replace him, unless he's doing something ethically wrong.
Right.
Ed Orgeron, I understand why they fired him. There was a lot more to it than just what's going on. Dan Mullen, I don't know of anything. Right. Clay Helton should have never been fired and just removed right away. But if you're USC, that's a situation where I understand it because it just wasn't going anywhere. But here's the problem. Do you continue under Clay Helton until you find someone else, or do you fire him and then run the risk of just hiring another Clay Helton? And now you've had to pay 2 buyouts.
Right.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Yep.
And so, I mean, Matt Campbell, his stars faded a little bit. They're 6-5, right? I mean, there's not a lot of big names out there, in my opinion. James Franklin's not nearly as attractive now as he maybe would have been a couple years ago because his team's 11-9 the last 2 years, and he's had some off the field question marks. Urban Meyer's in the NFL, and I don't think anybody's going to be looking at Urban Meyer right now.
No,
so that's the whole point is who are the big names that are out there?
Yeah.
Mario Cristobal doesn't get in trouble. He doesn't act like a buffoon.
Sure.
He doesn't, he seems like a good guy, and a part he recruits well.
Right.
Yeah, I get it. And I also understand why teams why Florida would be interested in Miami if they fired Manny Diaz, because he's a Florida native.
Yeah.
So there's that connection there too. So, but I mean, I don't disagree with you, but who else is out there right now?
Yeah, exactly. Corey D has a super chat. Thanks, Corey. Says the reason Notre Dame would have a chance in the playoff is this. There is no 2019 Bama or 2018 Clemson, all the great teams. And I would also add 2019 LSU.
Who was better than any of those teams.
Yeah, right, exactly. But he's right. There's not. And as much as Georgia has been the clear number one team all along, there's still chinks in that armor. Like, that offense is nothing that's all that spectacular, right?
LSU
so there's
2019 versus Clemson 2018 would have been a great game.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I thought you were going to say versus Georgia this year. I was like,
no, they would smash them. Yeah. They would have beat Bama last year convincingly because Bama last year couldn't stop Kyle Trask and Kyle Pitts. What would they have done against that LSU offense? But Clemson 2018 had an elite defense and an elite offense by the end of the year. And I would love to have seen, and I think LSU probably would have won. That was one of the best teams I've ever seen in my life. That offense
was so good. It was just
them
so
and
good.
01 Miami are probably the two best teams that I've seen in my life.
Yeah.
Just, it's like my adult life.
Bob Sacamano. Thank you, Bob. Really appreciate it. He says, how are the USC facilities? My gut tells me the Pac-12 could be falling behind in the arms race. I would say that's probably true across the board for the Pac-12 at the moment, except for Oregon. Yeah. Oregon's facilities are pretty sweet.
I have never I've never seen USC's facilities. I've heard they're good, nothing special.
Right. They're adequate, but nothing that's going to blow anybody away. That's what I've heard personally. But Oregon's are really good. They got all that Nike money. I mean,
what they need to do is step up and pay their coaches more. That's something that's hurting
Oregon. Or USC.
Yeah. Oregon. Oh, USC's. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. That's going to do it for the.
Jared McIntosh had an interesting comment. This is something that I heard Gary Barta say before our show started.
Yeah.
He said it was refreshing to hear Barta say they don't look strongly at conference affiliation. Now, I don't buy it, but the fact that he said it means that they're going to be more open to making sure they get the 4 teams they want in.
Yeah.
Not what, because again, it amazes me that we're 7 years in and the people at ESPN who get paid to do this still don't understand what the committee looks at. Their obsession with conference championships, despite the fact the committee has shown no allegiance to conference championships, it blows my mind. I mean, Alabama got in without winning a conference championship.
Yeah.
Ohio State got in a year where they lost to the conference champion, right? I mean, it's a data point, not this trump card that ESPN's analysts think that it is, right? And the Big 12 champ isn't going to get in over Notre Dame just because they won the Big 12. They're going to get in over Notre Dame because their resume, top to bottom, is better. And I think the thing that to me, the thing that I'm interested in, Vince, of how is the committee going to view what Oklahoma State did in the non-conference? Because to me, they have a 7-point win over Southwest Missouri State.
Right.
FCS team. They have a 5-point win over Tulsa. They have a 1-point win over Boise State. Their non-conference games, they won over Southwest Missouri State, Tulsa, and Boise. They won by a grand total of 13 points. They didn't start whooping teams until they got to the Big 12 play.
So what does that say about the Big 12?
Right. And so that's something I think that people are going to look at. I think they're going to look at the fact that, Baylor, you look at Baylor, for example, they have a little bit better of it because they have the win over BYU, but their other wins are over Texas Southern and a 9-point win over Texas State, right? Texas State is 3-8 right now. Oklahoma, we've talked about, ugly win over Nebraska, ugly win over Tulane. So that's something else that's hurting the Big 12. The Big 12 did not exactly light the world on fire in non-conference. And I think that's something that we have to think about too, is if they're going to look at the whole season, that's something else that could factor into this as well. We did have another super chat that came up, Vince.
Just came in. Freddie Nat Stadelbauer. Thanks, Freddie. Appreciate it. It says, does UM get in over Notre Dame if they win against Ohio State and lose to Wisconsin? Folks saying they would be punished for a title game with a team they beat. Pollock equals meathead. I do not think they get in over Notre Dame if they beat Ohio State and then lose to Wisconsin.
Right, they have 2 losses.
That's the bottom line, is they have 2 losses.
I mean, look, these games still count, right? If you don't want to get punished for being a championship game, blame ESPN. That's the only reason we have championship games, because ESPN and money, right? I mean, that's it. So blame ESPN, blame yourselves. Give up the championship games. Have everybody play 12 games, right?
Yep.
Or play 11 and then have your 12th game be a championship game. Whatever. I don't care. But stop complaining about championship games because it's just it's a data point. And again, it doesn't matter to me because at least Michigan didn't play any FCS teams in their non-conference.
Yeah.
Unlike the old SEC. But no, Michigan would not get in because their resume, in my opinion, wouldn't be as strong. Yes, the win over Ohio State would be very impressive, but it would be negated by a loss to Wisconsin.
Yes, it would.
And yeah, they beat Wisconsin, but you're supposed to handle your business and beat twice. It's
right.
I mean, and I'm sympathetic to that, right? It's like 2011. I thought it was completely unfair to LSU that they had to play Alabama in a rematch. They shouldn't have had to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But that's different because that's actually the title game. That'd be like Michigan having a rematch against Wisconsin in the playoff. That's part of the deal.
That's exactly. That's what you signed up for.
Yeah, I mean that's the deal. So I mean, and here's the thing. Now, if Michigan would have beat Michigan State and then lost to Wisconsin, then they'd get in, right? Even with the loss to Wisconsin. Like if Michigan was undefeated right now and beat Michigan State on the road and then goes and beats Ohio State at home and loses to Wisconsin in a rematch, a team that they beat at their place, I'd say, you know what? Michigan still deserves to be in.
You got a real good argument to have Michigan still be in. I agree.
Right. For the reasons that's
the Ohio State Penn State argument that was a few years ago, right? Penn State is the champ, and Ohio State gets in over them because they were a better team.
Right. They had a better resume.
Right.
My thing was a 12-1 Michigan. The only negative for them would be when they lost. But we're not supposed to care about that. We're supposed to look at the entirety of the resume. A Michigan team with a win over Michigan State on the road, a 20-something point win over Wisconsin on the road, and then a win over Ohio State and a loss in a title game to who by then would be a top 10 Wisconsin, because if Wisconsin beats Michigan, they're in the top 10. So you beat two top 10 teams, lost to a top 10 team, and beat another top 15 team. Two of those games are on the road. You're in the playoff.
Yeah.
I don't care that you lost your championship game. You're one of the 4 best teams.
Right.
But they should, hey, if you don't want to have this debate and if you don't want to be punished, then don't lose to Michigan State. Don't blow a 16-point lead to Michigan State, and it's all good.
And then it's a moot point.
Right. So, exactly. They're not going to get in. They're not going to not get in because they lost a rematch to Wisconsin. They're going to not get in because they lost to Michigan State.
Right.
And lost to Wisconsin.
Exactly.
In a rematch.
That's 2 losses.
It's the 2 losses.
Yeah.
And I don't think Michigan's going to be the team that they it becomes the first 2-loss team. Now, could there be utter chaos and they still get in because of a bunch of craziness?
Of course.
The way this season has gone, man, I'm not putting anything by anybody.
Yep.
So,
all right, I got one last question for you. Tom A says it's the most relevant question. He says, most relevant question, Vincent Bryan, what's your preference, white or dark turkey meat?
I prefer white, but I'll eat both.
I like the dark because it's juicier. I do like that a little bit, but sometimes the white can be a little drier, and I'm not a huge fan of gravy. And I know gravy is the cure-all for everything dry, but I'm not a huge gravy fan. So,
I don't do gravy. We have another we baste the turkey throughout, which helps keeps it really moist.
Right. Yep.
And our white meat's not dry, so just cook it better.
I didn't say it was a dry.
No, I like the taste of white meat better, but I also like some dark meat. Like I like the leg. I'll eat the leg, some of the leg, because my wife does not eat dark meat. So I'll eat some of that. So, but that's my thing. So, but hey, look, y'all, this is going to be an incredibly fun week of college football.
It is.
And next 2 weeks of college
followed
football.
by another incredible week of football. Yeah.
Yes. And Andy Roque says, hey guys, who would you rather play in the first round of the college football playoff, Ohio State or Georgia? We talked about that earlier. I'd rather play Georgia. Now here's the thing is I would rather play them in that order too. Like I would rather play Georgia and then Ohio State in the title game than to play Ohio State in the Final Four. And then you tell me they're going to beat Ohio State and then you play Georgia in the championship game. I would rather it be the other way around. I would rather play Ohio State in the title game simply because I feel like getting that win over Georgia
was going to give you a lot of confidence.
A lot of confidence. Beating Ohio State is going to give you a lot of confidence too, but I feel like you're going to be a little bit worn down after that game to then go play Georgia. You know what I mean? As opposed to really being fresh. Like Notre Dame plays Georgia, they're going to be really fresh in the first round because they're going to have a month off.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
And so that's where you want to be as fresh as possible when you play Georgia, because it's going to be a war. And I would rather do that than after having to play Ohio State, then playing Georgia, because then you're going to be a little bit more beat up because you played Ohio State. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of my stance. And hey, I got to give a shout out to my guy Paul McConnell. He says Bama can get in with 2 losses if they lose close to number 1 team in conference championship while Notre Dame sits at home. Just saying equals possible. I don't think they're going to get in over Notre Dame with a close loss, but I'll give Paul credit. He called out Desmond Howard and got Desmond Howard to give some childish petty response to him. Because he talked about how basically Notre Dame's a better program than Michigan, and Desmond has just the worst stupid takes ever. But he got Desmond a response. So mad respect for my man Paul McConnell there.
That's great.
Yes. Definitely appreciate it. So hey, that's going to do it for tonight's show, everybody. Thank you so much. Great crowd tonight. A lot of great football talk. This was a lot of fun. I think this weekend's going to be fun.
Yeah, it is.
I'm giving you a heads up. Vince, you are not going to be on the post game show or the post.
Correct.
You'll be, but you will be on the upon further review show.
Mm-hmm.
If Notre Dame wins convincingly, we will talk for about 10 minutes about the Notre Dame Stanford game on Sunday night, and then the rest is going to be about this weekend's football. Just giving you a heads up right now. If it's a close game, we may talk more about it.
Right,
but otherwise, it's not. Vince, can you?
Yeah. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. And so make sure you hit the subscribe button. Make sure you hit that notification bell so you know when we come on Tuesday nights, when we come on during post game, all that. Because if you don't hit the bell, you just don't know. If you're listening to us on the podcast, make sure you give us a 5-star review. We'd really appreciate it. And I think that's probably going to do it, right, Brian? You're muted.
Yes, this is possible, but not likely.
Yeah, it's not likely at all.
Yeah,
I don't think, because I think they're going to be 3-4, or
it would have to involve the Big Ten team, the Big
Out.
Ten East champ getting beat by Wisconsin.
Yeah.
To me, that's the only way Notre Dame can jump. The only other scenario would be Bama loses to Auburn and then beats Georgia, and somehow Georgia drops to 4, because otherwise you don't want to have a Bama
Georgia
rematch.
Right.
So, if that works out that way, then it'd be Ohio State 1, Georgia 4, or Bama, Georgia 4. It's chaotic, but no, I don't see that happening. A lot would have to happen.
Yeah.
In my opinion, for that.
Yep.
What I was trying to say is if Bama beat Georgia and then it's all chaos.
A lot needs to happen for that to even.
I'm like confusing myself right now. Like
yeah.
it's like it. Yeah, I don't see it happening. A lot would have to happen.
Yep.
A lot would have to happen.
And basically the bottom line for me is what would have to happen is Cincinnati and Notre Dame would have to win their first round matchup. Then they play in the championship game against each other. That's the most likely scenario for them to face off.
I don't see happening that. I don't
either.
That would be fun. Imagine, think of the storyline though.
Oh my gosh. That'd be crazy.
First group of 5 ever against the coach at Notre Dame
who used to be
left them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. That Brian Kelly finally gets his title against the team
that he left.
That he left to come to Notre Dame. Like that would be such an amazing week of storylines. And it would just the heads would explode at ESPN. A group of 5 and Notre Dame, no Power 5s in the net
gosh.
Yes, I still feel like ESPN doesn't even count Notre Dame as a Power 5.
They don't,
which is hilarious. But that would be maybe as much fun as the game. Not quite, but close. Just see ESPN have to talk about Notre Dame for a week, and
that'd be great.
Actually, be a little more than, isn't it like 10 days? Isn't the
it's a lot, and plus they'd have to talk about it, up to, because you have to talk about those two, but going to the semifinal.
Oh goodness,
it'd be
that would be wonderful. But yes, that's more likely than they play in the first round. I think the only other thing that could happen is if somehow Cincinnati got to 1 and Notre Dame was 4. But again, I think all that chaos would jump Notre Dame into the top 3. So I can't even fathom how that would happen.
Right.
Other than just the Big Ten get knocked out and Georgia beating. This is what I was trying to say earlier. But even then, like you could say, well, maybe if Ohio State gets knocked out and Alabama barely loses to Georgia and they take Alabama over Ohio State, but even then, they would want to move Bama up into the 3, or they would want to move it around so that they don't have an Alabama Georgia rematch, right? That's the thing, and so you'd see either Georgia be in the top 2 or be the 2 or 3 seed, or Notre Dame. In that scenario, maybe you could see Cincinnati jump up to 1, but I just don't. I don't see it
for me, but that's
I don't
fine.
see it. Anyway, we are now officially done. So everybody, thanks so much for being with us. We'll talk to you all tomorrow, 12:30 Eastern.
Yes.
Talk to you soon.